This week on Behind the Lens, I'm joined by Joe Cornish. Joe is one of the most recognised and accomplished landscape photographers in Britain. Originally from Exeter, he now lives in North Yorkshire. And although having travelled to places like Antarctica and New Zealand, he is increasingly taking pictures locally. Joe has produced many books over the years, judged for the most prestigious photography competitions, and is an honorary fellow of the Royal Photographic Society. He co-owns the Joe Cornish Gallery in Northallerton, which as well as his own work, hosts other artists and photographers and is well worth a look. Joe works closely with PhotoSpeed, who he is an ambassador for, and Lee Filters, which Joe frequently uses for his landscape photography. So let's see what are Joe Cornish's 3 most memorable images.
Well, Joe, thanks for joining me. It's going to be fantastic to see some of your images. I think in terms of landscape photography, you're obviously one of the higher tiers of British landscape photographers, even if you wouldn't say that yourself.
I definitely wouldn't.
So the first image, let's have a look at that.
Well, this is a shot from Holmfell in the Lake District, just north of Coniston. And it's quite a popular spot with landscape photographers. I must say that the main reason I wanted to focus on it is partly compositional, but a lot of it is narrative. Which is to say that all landscape pictures, if you know how to read them, can tell you a story. And after all, we're storytelling creatures. That's how we communicate, by and large. However much we might feel that we're being analytical, logical, scientific. Even scientists have to tell stories. So, what is it? It's an area of recovering woodland, just lit by a shaft of weak autumnal sunlight.
Yeah.
In the foreground, it's a mixture of larch and silver birch there. And so that's the foreground. We think of it as sort of 3 zones. In the middle distance, you can see the kind of destruction zone, if you like, which is an area of quarrying. So what you see there now is essentially the debris piles from slate mining that's gone on from around 300 years ago. I don't know the intimate history of the area, but the vast workings, and it's not an exaggeration to say that a hillside has been removed from this space. So if you'd been there 350 years ago into this view, it wouldn't have looked anything like what it looks like now. And in the far distance are the Langdale Pikes, which are some of the most iconic hills in the Lake District. So they tell you another kind of story. They look immutable, they look unchanged for millennia, or at least since the Ice Age. And that is true. So to me, there's an interesting landscape story there that can be told through this still photograph.
So is that what drew it? Was it more the story? Did you pre-plan that shot, or was it a case you were just out, you saw that vista and you thought, that's the shot for me? Or
that's a very insightful question, because the truth is that for me, and I think for probably most landscape photographers, the process itself is one of personal discovery. That's to say that you focus more on the experience, the joy of being outdoors and walking and looking at the space and the textures and the colours and the forms around you, and you do your best to find meaning actually purely in those forms alone. And often it's only afterwards you realise what you're looking at. And I think that with a picture like this, you could say, well, it uses a number of relatively conventional pictorial devices, but then there are some that are not so conventional. Which I can point out. The first of which is that compositionally it doesn't correspond to some of the more usual compositional tropes that are out there. It uses quite a strong central core. It has a kind of X-axis if you look at the lighting. And where it flows through the foreground. And so there's a slight tension there in the way that the light is drawn as against the kind of depth elements which essentially draw through the centre of the composition from the trees in the immediate foreground to the Langdale Pikes in the distance. And also you find little elements of light and colour that correspond through the space. So yes, there's that weak sunlight in the foreground, there's also a little bit of sunlight in the middle distance. And then again, you see that shaft of sunlight on the bottom of the hills in the valley in the Langdales. So that provides a kind of link of energy, stroke, depth, which I think draws space as well as all the texture and colour of the foreground.
So your second image, why does this one stand out for you?
Well, this is local, so it's very important in terms of my own agenda, partly because I'm a big believer in practice, so I practice my landscape photography by photographing locally. So large amount of my archive is local photographs made just in the woodland and on the moor around our village, and this is one of those. It's winter, as you can see.
Yeah.
And so it really was, I seem to remember I had a new lens to test one of those days.
Yeah.
And I think it was an 85mm. And I went out to local woodland with snow falling, still falling I think when I left, which is ideal when if you're a landscape photographer and you leave it until the snow stops falling. Invariably, by the time you get there, it's fallen off all the trees in the UK. It's never cold enough anymore. And without wishing to get into the discussion about climate change, it seems that each winter goes by and there's less and less of it. That seems to be a trend anyway. We have a plantation at the just east of the village on the edge of the moor. And I often walk through there with my dog. On this occasion, it was on my own, not with the dog, which was just as well, I think, as you'll see. So I'm just gently making my way through the woodland and noticed that there was a spot where the wood was thinning, and behind this spot, snowy hillside, and it formed a sort of window into the world, really, through the trees. The lovely trees. Okay, they're plantation trees. They're mostly Sitka spruce, but I've known them for a long, long time, and having been walked through them for 20 odd years, and love the look of this window of light, and set my camera up on a tripod and tweak the edges and so on. And I was just about to shoot when I saw this deer rodeo, and so kept very quiet. And once it arrived in a position where it was not in front or behind any trees, I made a photo. And what I realised is that about literally a second after I made the photo, its head pricked, ears pricked up, and clearly, absolutely, and even though it's a pretty quiet camera, it had heard the camera from across the way, even it's getting over 100 metres away, and then I took another photo, which is the one that you see, and then it was gone.
Well, it's funny because just before we started recording this, I mentioned to you that increasingly more and more photographers are kind of switching onto this style of an animal in the landscape, or a landscape with an animal, whichever way you want to look at it. And I think it's fantastic because with wildlife photography, there can be this obsession with great big long lenses and you've got to use these to get the images, when in actual fact, I find these kind of images far more interesting because it's so much about the environment, the context, the animal within its environment. So I'd much rather see an image like that where the deer is such a small part of it, but it makes the image to a degree. It'd be a lovely image without the deer, but with that deer, it's fantastic. It's great to see the animals in there.
I think the landscape and wildlife are not that far apart in lots of ways, but they are. It's true that I think that the prevailing culture of wildlife photography for many years has been to make very striking frame-filling images of powerful animals, and of course those pictures are fantastic, but you can get a little bit weary of them as well. And in some ways, the genre that you're describing, which is really landscape photography, which happens to have an animal,
Yeah.
it is it's always been out there, but perhaps it's only now being recognised.
So last but certainly not least, we've got this third image. What about this one?
Well, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, this one, Jack, I think you could say, because I think if I look back across my career as a photographer, then I feel that Coast has given me an enormous amount of inspiration. Scotland has given me a lot of inspiration, and mountains as well. So in a way, and geology. So this picture, in a way, is like a kind of a fusion of many of those sort of favourite things. And also, I think that although I'd like to talk about light a bit too, because I wrote a book nearly 20 years ago now called First Light, and the emphasis, I mean, perhaps when you think of first light, well, that's the first light in the morning, but actually it's a little play on words, because it's intended to be, what's your first consideration? Light.
Yeah.
And actually, although the emphasis in my work has changed in that time, it's still very important to how pictures work. And where I think I've changed my own view is that that for light to work, it doesn't necessarily have to be some spectacular moment of light. It's much more about the emotion of light in a given place and time. And because during that time I've done a lot of workshops, I've been forced by circumstance to photographing all sorts of lighting conditions. Because obviously, if you have a workshop group meet and you're confronted by a week of, let's say, very average weather, you've still got to find things to do and make the most of the opportunities that do arise. So that's been a great experience for me, and I've really discovered the pleasure and the challenge of working in rain, for example, with drizzle or high winds. The latter would never be a real favourite of mine, but
well, I suppose as well, a lot of photographers, maybe not a lot of photographers, you get a lot of fair weather who maybe don't want to go out in those conditions, but I guess that means you see less images in those conditions, and often they're the most dramatic ones to get images out. Maybe challenging as well, but you're going to get images that fewer people will get.
I think the key is that when you're forced to work in difficult conditions, so long as you remain focused on the task at hand, opportunities arise that you don't otherwise expect. And I honestly think that some of my best photographs have been made in very little light, or very uninteresting light, or light that looks very unpromising. So my notion of first light is still true, but my idea of what that really means has probably changed.
It's actually phenomenal. Like you say, it's got those kind of traditional elements like that you've almost become, well, you have become known for, but looking for those, the rock in the foreground, or the kind of the layers and whatnot. So yeah, you can see that image, and it's a Joe Cornish. I don't know what the term for people would call a Joe Cornish one.
Yes, it's the epithet JCB, Joe Cornish boulder.
That's it. So I was trying to remember that. I've heard that many
I
times.
can't believe I just said that. It's embarrassing, but what I perhaps not talked very much about before is that association goes much further back than the first photographs I started to make of those round bowls. I still come across them. Anybody could come across them in the landscape from time to time, but the more likely to be found by the coast, because clearly it's an environment where rocks have rolled around in countless tidal cycles and big storms and have all their sharp edges knocked off them. But what is it about them? You know, they become like globes in the land, and that global form is not just why does it appeal to us? Maybe it's because it's a fundamental form of nature. You look up into the night sky and look at the planets, or look back from the lunar module and see the Earth rising above the moon's surface. For people of a certain generation, that is one of the most powerful experiences of photography we ever had. You know, at the age of 11, or whenever NASA finally published that, which I was then, in 1970, 69, 70. seeing those pictures of the Earth was very powerful, and I think that you hold those kind of references in your imagination. For me, this particular picture has that ring of foaming water around the rock in the foreground. You cannot help but reference Saturn's rings.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be strange not to, I feel. If you look at the detail in the picture, you'll find there's a little bass clef in the, if you have like musical notations, just to the northwest of the boulder, for example.
Yes, yeah, I see it now. Yes,
See it?
yeah.
Which is just a little swirl of
Yeah.
water. If you look further into the picture, there are the contrast between the still, hard, rocky detail and the kind of motion blur of the water. For me, it's a fascinating contrast, and it's one that I think photographers, many landscape photographers, like playing with. And certainly for me, it's all part of the fun of playing with shutter speed in order to find what's the moment, what's the shutter speed that best captures the message or idea that you'd like to convey. In my case, that is the restless energy of the sea. If you look further into the photograph, you see the cresting wave on the cusp of breaking, and in fact it has broken in the past. You can also see that is blowing back with the wind coming off the shore in this case, and that's an additional element of energy, of the restless energy of nature.
Well, it's fascinating to hear your insight into these images, say, not coming from a landscape background. I haven't got a clue. I can do landscape, but I'm not a master at it all, so seeing how you can dissect these images is fantastic. But what have you got coming up? What are you working on? And obviously everyone should visit the Joe Cornish Gallery, not only for the fantastic cake and cup of tea that I had earlier, but also all the amazing images, not only your own, but lots of guest photographers and artists. I mean, it's a fantastic trip for anyone to come and visit. But
thank you. Yes, well, I mean, the gallery is best coffee in North Yorkshire as well.
I don't drink coffee, but I'm sure it is.
So it's a community gallery. Yes, I still have work up, but I really do love to promote the fact that we have work by many wonderful photographers in here. I'm not going to mention them by name because I'm bound to forget. So better to just leave it, invite anyone who is in the area to visit and find lots of inspiration. We do have wildlife photography here too, but the majority of it is landscape photography. A lot of it is local work, but there's also work from further afield. So I hope there's a little bit of something for everyone. We also host events here, musical events, and conferences or mini conferences on photography, and we really want to encourage the idea that this is a great venue as well to hold such events. So if anybody would like to approach us about it, we're very happy to host them. A couple more points. One is going out into what you say you don't do landscape photography, but one of the things that I often get asked about is filtration, because in the digital era, modern camera sensors are so good that on the face of it you can just expose not to burn out the highlights and then just recover everything. But I will say that personally, if I have wide range or high dynamic range photograph, which is usually one with the sky in it, that I still use filters, because to me it's part of the pleasure of making the photograph is to have it look right in camera. It's not the only way of taking it, it's just a personal preference. And I've had a lot of support over the years from Lee Filters, so I'm a big fan of theirs. They do make wonderful filters, hand finished and everything. I'm also a PhotoSpeed ambassador, and they've been terrific support to me. And the papers that they produce are just right for what I'm trying to do, and I do regard making prints as, not surprisingly, since we have a gallery, a pretty important part of the process. And also the kind of just the realization, the end point of your photography. Not only that, I actually think it makes you a better photographer. It also enables you to think more dispassionately about the idea of of the final presentation. Now, many people don't print their work and will put it on social media or so on, but looking at an image on screen is one thing. It's very good, obviously, very important, but it is different to making a print for paper, which requires a sort of higher level of scrutiny than an image for screen, and that extra mile that you have to go, I think, helps inform the way that you see and certainly improves your technique.
Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure talking, Joe. Thanks for taking the time. And, yeah, great to meet you.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching, and why not check out our other interviews here? Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to keep up to date with the latest content. Until next time, cheers.